Today's guest is someone I've admired for a long time, Emma Cox, CEO of Endometriosis UK. Under Emma's leadership, the charity has continued to be a leading voice for the 1 in 10 women and those assigned female at birth living with endometriosis in the UK. Emma has been instrumental in driving national awareness, influencing policy at the highest levels, and breaking the long-standing medical silence around this condition. Thanks to her work, endometriosis is no longer something whispered about in private. It's now finally starting to be part of the mainstream health and workplace conversations. From tackling an average 9-year diagnosis delay to advocating for proper menstrual health education in schools and better treatment pathways in the NHS, Emma's impact has been massive. Before joining Endometriosis UK, she worked across campaigning and policy in the charity sector, championing rights and access to support and care. She's known for strategic, no-nonsense leadership and her deep commitment to empowering those whose pain has been ignored or dismissed for far too long. And for me personally, this conversation is a really special one. As someone living with stage 4 endometriosis, I actually worked for Endometriosis UK as a forum moderator a few years ago, supporting the online community. It was one of the first spaces where I really saw how much this condition can affect an area of someone's life, physically, emotionally, and professionally. Emma and I have crossed paths a few times since then, through fundraising and shared advocacy. What's always struck me is how deeply she listens to the community. Even though she doesn't live with endometriosis herself, she really does truly get it. And I can't think of a better guest to help me launch this podcast and start the kind of honest, challenging and empowering conversations that owning space is all about. For those who may not know what endometriosis is, it's a chronic condition where tissues similar to the lining of the womb grows elsewhere in the body, often causing severe pain, inflammation, and fertility issues. It's not just a bad period. It can also cause debilitating pelvic pain, bowel and bladder issues, and painful sex. Overall, 82% of people living with endometriosis experience one or more of these core symptoms, often daily. Hello, Emma.
Hi, lovely to be here.
So honoured that you're my very first guest on Owning Space, so thank you so much. I couldn't have asked for a better guest. Could you tell us a little bit about Endometriosis UK and your mission there?
Absolutely. So lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very honoured to be your first guest. So Endometriosis UK is the UK's leading charity supporting those and working to improve conditions around endometriosis. And so what we do, as you'd expect a charity like us to do, the absolute heart of what we do is providing support. And you know this because you've been a forum moderator and you volunteered for us before, thank you. And so we provide support through a trained network of over 200 trained volunteers who help with peer support on a helpline, online forum, through our support groups all over the UK, and generally being really amazing at supporting people with endometriosis is absolutely heart of what we do. We then campaign, raise awareness and fight for change across all 4 nations in the UK, because we don't think it's good enough that what's happening at the moment, and we want things to improve. We also work to ensure those with endometriosis can live the lives they want to. It's a disease that often is in quite young people, early career, and these are people who should be out having fun, enjoying life, developing careers, social lives, etc. And we want to see a world where that isn't limited. And the 4th area that we do is we really support research. So we work with researchers across the UK, sometimes Europe as well, to try and ensure that research is really focused on what it is that those with the disease want to see researched and that their views are taken into account. So all in all, we just want to change the world.
Yeah, and I think you guys are doing it. And I just have to say, I loved working at Endometriosis UK. I just felt so empowered working with such brilliant women, making an impact. So as mentioned in the introduction, we know the average wait time for a diagnosis is around about 9 years. It's 2025. What's going on, and why do you think the diagnosis time is still that long, and how can we move forward?
So I've been involved for about 10 years, and the diagnosis time was always about 8 years. And unfortunately, that has increased, and it's increased due to COVID. Well, due to the delays that came around because of COVID. But what I think is important is that we know that there's a really tough time in COVID, but I think it's worth highlighting that it was the gynecology waiting list that went up by the highest percentage of any waiting list. And unfortunately, I think it just shows yet again the lack of priority and understanding that is given to conditions like endometriosis. And so what we do know, though, because I always like to start with the positive, is we do know that in terms of diagnosis, probably about 10 to 12 of people that we hear from get a diagnosis really quickly. So average of a year or less, their GP recognises the symptoms, they're signposted to the right place, and they can access where they need. But unfortunately, if we talk of an average of 9 years, everyone who's had a 1-year diagnosis, that means someone's got an 18-year diagnosis. So I think we're also seeing, sadly, there's a lot of people whose symptoms haven't been recognised. They may be, like, in inverted commas, put on the pill, told to just it's normal, and then of course that can delay diagnosis significantly.
You mentioned there the misdiagnosis, and I, for one, it took me 13 years to get diagnosed, but I was diagnosed with many different conditions before endometriosis. And then you mentioned that the time is, it's lessening now, which is brilliant to hear. Why do you think women do get misdiagnosed so many times with different conditions such as polycystic ovaries? And why do you think GPs are more likely to give out the pill or strong painkillers than to send a woman for a scan, for example?
So I think there's a whole host of issues in there. I think firstly, we do know that endometriosis doesn't have a simple test yet to diagnose. I say yet because I know there's a lot of research going on. I do hope soon there will be a non-surgical test for endometriosis that's you've got good research evidence published behind it. But there isn't a test. And so often for endometriosis in primary care, it's about ruling things out. And the thing is, bodies are, unique. And also people quite often do have more than one condition. Not always, I know that. But for example, around about maybe 40% of those people with endometriosis may also have adenomyosis. We also know that people might have fibroids, etc. And so sometimes it's ruling things in and out. But I think what the challenge for me is, I think there's this real societal issue where period pain is normalised or not believed. I don't know if you ever got this, but periods are painful, just get on with it, which is a ridiculous thing to say, isn't it? And therefore, rather than actually trying to find out the cause of those, if people think it's normal, they just treat the symptom. They don't try and find a cause. And so unfortunately, we have this situation where quite often young people in their teens might be going in saying, I've got these problems. They're put on the pill, especially if they might have concurrent acne or something. Someone say, oh, great, well, this will help both those things. They're led to believe it's normal. And sometimes, because hormonal contraceptions can be a treatment for endometriosis, sometimes it does control the symptoms, but they're never empowered or diagnosed. They're never actually had it explained to them. I don't know of any other condition where we medicate, especially young people, without trying to find the cause. And I think for me, that's the root of the problem. And I think where we can, where there is potential is that if we can get the training of GPs right and medical students right and get people thinking about menstrual health conditions, including endometriosis, I think it would make a real difference.
Amazing, thank you. We're speaking about the UK, and this episode is mainly focused on the UK. However, globally, would you say there's anyone who's doing it better than us? Or from a diagnosis point of view, it's less than 9 years as an average stat?
So I haven't got the exact figures, but I do believe there's some real positive steps being taken in some other countries. So what we saw in Australia a few years ago was a government strategy on endometriosis, 80 million Australian dollars put into it, lots of work being done on research around all aspects of endometriosis, including a diagnosis. And I believe that there will be real progress there. We've seen some countries, Australia, New Zealand, also in America, where they're bringing in education programs to raise awareness of endometriosis and menstrual health in a managed and supportive way in schools, which would bring down diagnosis times. People are empowered to seek help and know what they're, they aren't making it up and to go forward. And we also have a situation in France where President Macron did announce a strategy on endometriosis and investment behind that too. So I think there's things happening, just like there is stuff happening in the UK. It's just not going anywhere near as quickly as any of us would like. And I think the thing that always amazes me is if you talk to the top endometriosis surgeons, they will say, the only thing I need to diagnose someone with endometriosis is I need 2 ears to listen to them. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit graphic, I need 2 fingers to do an internal examination. If I believe them and listen to the symptoms, I will know if they have endometriosis or not. And so I think there's a real issue about what is a diagnosis, when are people being told that word endometriosis. So I don't know, in your journey, when was the first time anyone mentioned endometriosis, or did you research it yourself?
That's a great question. I got diagnosed with endometriosis when I was 33. And I only heard about the condition when I was 31, which is appalling. We spoke about misdiagnoses before. I spoke previously about some gut issues and how endometriosis can affect your bowel and your bladder. And good friends will know this about me. I've had severe food poisoning a number of times and ended up in hospital on drips. And I was in hospital once for two weeks because of severe food poisoning. And I remember going to a doctor's surgery going, there is something wrong. There's something wrong. Every day, every time I'm on my period, I can't get out of bed. And I've got these things, some gut issues going on. And I was told continuously, I'm just unlucky. The pain is in my head.
Yeah, the pain. I mean, it's gobsmacking that can be said to this day, in this day and age. And the thought that someone at the moment would go to A&E voluntarily if they weren't really ill. I mean, everyone knows how challenging it is. Everyone knows there's really busy. Everyone knows what it's like to have a long wait. People don't just go for a laugh, do they? And so I think there is that issue. But I think, unfortunately, our medics who have, all are working. I mean, you go into medicine to help people. They're all got everything, their heart's in the right place. But it's just not been the education awareness. And I think if we can change that with the generation coming through, and if we can change it with those that are in practice at the moment, make a real difference. But I do find it frustrating that people are told things are in their head and they're medicated without being, diagnosed, so they can't have informed choice about what they go through. One of the things I would say is that one of the challenges with endometriosis is the symptoms do vary significantly person to person. I know you've had a really tough journey with it. You have stage 4, which is the most extensive type of endometriosis, and that probably impacts up to 20% of those with endometriosis. About 80% don't have deep endometriosis, and they still have major symptoms. So it doesn't matter, it doesn't really matter where your endometriosis is, the symptoms can be severe. But I think there's also people who have quite mild symptoms, and I think one of the challenges we have is how do we support everyone to get a diagnosis without worrying people who aren't going to have severe disease, but absolutely getting everyone who needs bowel issues or got bowel issues to the right person. One thing I was going to add as well is my guess, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is that you were put on the pill when you were quite young. And so what then happens is you're talking about your pill and your contraception to your practice nurse, but then you're going to your GP with bowel symptoms. And if those two aren't linked up, again, I think that's an issue. And I think, I think if we could train healthcare practitioners firstly to say, oh, tell me about your period. I mean, it has massive impact, doesn't it, on people? Or if someone's got bowel problems, saying, oh, can I just ask how you got any menstrual issues? And equally, if somebody is seeing a practice nurse about the pill and says, oh, I'm getting quite a lot of pain, they don't just try you on another pill. They say, oh, can I talk to you about any other symptoms you've got? So I think there's about joining the dots is going to be really important.
I think that's so interesting. And for me personally, just talking about my journey, even when I was in my mid-20s and my period was so heavy and it was debilitating and, it gradually got worse. And we've spoken about this before, you and I, Emma, about how painful periods are kind of taboo subjects and it's a bit of a dirty thing to talk about. And I do wonder if, and I really hope that's changing, with the recent kind of initiatives and it being brought to schools a little bit more. But for me, I thought that pain was normal. And, we won't get into it in this interview, but the gender pain gap, and it's that aspect of if a woman is experiencing pain and she's had that chronic pain her whole life, perhaps she's used to that and she thinks that's the norm. Even if her pain is, perhaps like an 8 out of 10 or something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think pain isn't believed, which is very annoying. I think, and I think also it's sort of a bit of a double whammy, is it? Because a lot of people will say, I had a painful period. What we say is if the pain's interfering with your day-to-day life, that you should go to a doctor. But people who've not had severe endometriosis pain will go, well, I once had a painful period and I was fine, and not understand it. And I think what I think is a positive is what we see in generations younger than mine is much more openness, talking about things, raising issues. And I think with younger people coming through demanding more answers, being able to access information more quickly, I think that's really great. I do think that will make a difference.
And that's exactly what Endometriosis UK does as a website. And there's so many things that a woman can do, or, a person with endometriosis, to support themselves without taking medication, with the low inflammatory foods and, taking out coffee and alcohol from your diet. And, as someone who tries to live my life like that, it does really work.
Yeah, it's worth saying different things work for different people there. We don't sadly, other than the anti-inflammatory diet, we don't sadly have enough information on diet and endometriosis because no one's bothered researching it, although that is changing. We're part of an EU project that's going to be looking at that. But I think that different things work for different people. And, the more we learn about endometriosis over time, the more we'll probably know about it. It's like got different types of disease. So you can have endometriomas on the ovaries, they're cysts. You can have deep endometriosis on the bowel. You can have what they call peritoneal or sometimes superficial endometriosis. I hate that word because superficial to medics means on the surface, and to the rest of us it means we think you're just being superficial. Anyway, peritoneal or superficial disease, and I think we'll find over time they might have, do they have different causes? Do they develop differently? Do they not develop, etc.? So I think we do need to learn more about it, but we have lots of information on our website. And the other thing that I would say to anyone who's listening who's maybe in an early stage of getting a diagnosis is just to reassure you that for many people the disease is manageable. Hormonal treatment is an effective medication for many people, not for everybody. And so please do check out what the different options are and have a look through and find out what works for you. And I think if we can move towards more personalised care so people get the support and treatment for what works for them, that would be great.
Great, thank you. A question off the back of that, and we'll probably go into this a little bit further later on, but if a girl or a woman is going through this debilitating pain, they don't really know what it is, and they think it's endometriosis, but their doctor isn't believing them, and they hear phrases like it's all in your head or take some more ibuprofen. What would you say to that woman to advocate better for themselves and try and get the either the scans or the kind of treatment that they deserve?
And what you can do is you very simply just put in the symptoms you're experiencing, and then it produces a letter that you can take to your GP that also links to the relevant NHS and NICE guidance that the GP would need to know. And so that you can go along and say, look, I think I've got symptoms and this is what Endometriosis UK is explaining. I think what's really challenging at the moment is it really depends who you see. And the other thing I would say is if you are seeing somebody and you're not happy with what they're saying as a doctor, everyone has an opportunity to request a second opinion. And so you can do that. And the other thing is if you're in a practice that has got more than one GP, a lot of GPs practices will have people that specialise in different things. So ask the receptionist, is there somebody that specialises in women's health? And then make an appointment to see that person because they will have more training in this. So I think it's around, trying to keep a low to pain and symptoms, seeing if someone can help you, and do check out our symptom checker. We also have a nurse-led helpline, and we also have a peer support helpline, so other people who've been through different things. And so again, if you just want to talk to somebody, you can find details on our website.
Amazing, thank you. I'd like to talk about endometriosis in the workplace and policy change. What needs to shift in the workplace to better support people living with endometriosis?
Well, the thing for me is that would be just the most important is endometriosis needs to be thought of and treated as you would any other medical condition in the workplace. And I think that, one of the issues we have is people, as you said, can be a taboo subject. People might not want to talk about it, etc. And actually, it shouldn't matter what you are suffering from as a long-term condition. You should be given the adjustments that you need. And so for me, that recognition that we touched on right at the beginning, recognition, etc. And that's why we started the Endometriosis Friendly Employer Scheme. One of the main issues we were having from our helplines is that people were finding challenges at work and wanted it to be easily explained. And so we have resources for employers around what is endometriosis and what people can do. And then there's some really simple things that can happen. Is firstly, for employers, not just pulling a face and not wanting to talk about things that are menstrual related, just get over it. I think the other thing is around and it does vary depending on different roles, but things like one that always gets me is uniforms. So one of the things about endometriosis is often not talked about, I think not enough because it's just not considered by medics really, is bloating. And some people, but not everyone, get quite severe cyclical bloating to the extent that their clothes size changes. If you offer uniforms, offer them in more than one size. Just help that. I think the other thing is around access to toilets, allowing people to manage if they've got shift patterns around their cycle, which they know, and things like that. And I think it's quite easy to think of some adjustments in the office, if you're in an office space, maybe some home working, etc. But not everyone has that opportunity. And we've got a range of employers, banks, British Airways, various rail companies, and they're all having to work out what is it we can do to support our people who are out and about, police forces, etc. I don't think there's a magic wand because everyone's endometriosis is different. But if a police force can start thinking about how do I help someone when they're on a stakeout, how can I do that? Then I think, we're starting to move forward with things as well. Long way to go on this one though.
You've worked at Endometriosis UK for a decade. What were the biggest challenges that you faced when you've been pushing for change, whether in policy, business or government settings?
Oh, how many challenges. I think the awareness, definitely at the beginning, I think, and overcoming some of the old myths about the disease. Like it can't be, young people can't get it. How annoying is that? I think really, I think there was we have seen, I've been quite impressed at times as well when things have changed quite quickly, not as much as we all want, don't get me wrong, but for example, menstrual health education in schools was the minister took that on board really quickly. But I think one of the issues is that we have so little information and government and the NHS need audit and statistics and details, and because so little research has been done, it's hard to say how much does endometriosis cost. And it's something that I sometimes used to hear that winds me up no end. It's like, well, if we diagnose people, then they need surgery, so that's going to cost money. And you can imagine how annoying that is. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do is show that if we improve diagnosis, if we improve access to treatment ongoing, it will save time in GP appointments, going to A&E, as well as stopping people suffering and helping people's lives. So I think really it's that trying to present an economic reason to do so when we don't quite have the data. But there's been some interesting work that in fact the government have funded on the impact of menstrual health, including endometriosis, on the workforce, recently published last year by the NHS Confederation, talking about endometriosis, menstrual health conditions, including endometriosis, costing 11 billion to the workforce a year. We've got the Office of National Statistics doing some work. So I'm rambling now. So it's a big area of work. So I think the things that have been difficult is firstly getting our foot in the door, but I think that's changing. And can I just say a massive thank you to everybody who's bared their soul and told their story, written to their MP or done anything, because it makes such a difference. I'm sorry that people have to, and there's some really difficult it can be for people to do so, but actually the people who've spoken to the media, spoken to their MPs, makes a massive difference. Thanks to everyone who's done that.
It's huge. And as someone who looks at the website quite often. I follow you guys on social media. What's sad to see, though, is there's so many stories which are so similar.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, people having a diagnosis of, sometimes plus 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I often feel with those, with the people who share their stories or bare their soul, it's more, it got to a stage where it was too late. So they, had to, get a surgery ASAP or something like that. And what, your powerful role is doing and the amazing work your team does is let's diagnose people early.
Absolutely. And real team effort. So all the work at Endometriosis UK, it's not me. I have the easy job in a way. It's like everyone else who does all the work, all our volunteers and our staff, and everyone who's ever helped us. I think the thing is, though, I think what is so amazing and generous of the people who share their stories is, you're right, they've had a difficult time, but they're using that very generously to help others have a better time in the future. And unfortunately, in this day and age with media, is the media always want a new story. They want somebody that's not spoken before. And so whilst we know that these are very repetitive, the people they're reaching, it might be the first time they've heard it. And so I think that's why the generosity of people sharing those stories is really important, because I think it does reach people every time.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I'd like to talk a little bit more about you, your advocacy and your power and your personal why.
Mm-hmm.
What has this work taught you about resilience, leadership and health in general?
Well, I think, think firstly, it is a team effort. It's not, you can always achieve more working with others. I was just chatting to Neelam, who runs Sisters, the other day, fantastic West Midlands based charity who do some great work. And we're working with them, for example, to do a survey, and we'll definitely do way better doing it in partnership rather than doing it ourselves. And I think for me, that's about how do we join up people who've got the same aim and go forward. So I think that's really important. I think sheer just not accepting no as an answer. I know, maybe I'm just a bit difficult. But I think, being really clear. And I think the other thing is having really good facts. So we do a lot of work with our medical advisory panel. We do a lot of work with researchers, and actually trying to find more facts and present them, because sometimes it doesn't mean things ever move as quickly as we want, but actually putting the facts forward. And I think the other bit is that, for me, is where I think we've been most successful, although there is a long way to go, is where we say, this is the problem, here's a solution. So not just saying it's bad, but saying it's bad, but it could be better, and we will be part of that solution to help you do that. And also then giving credit where credit's due. So, for example, the Scottish Government made a commitment to do in 2021, they launched a women's health plan, and they've done some good stuff. Is it as much as we want? No, not really. But they have made a difference. They are doing what they said, and they're looking at what's going on. So I think we should say, that's good. Things are moving, but be a critical but supportive friend. So yes, critique things when they're needed, but also offer those solutions. So I think trying to recognise and respect the challenges there are in turning around the NHS in any nation, but holding people to account, and also giving them tools and examples to do that. And I do think, and I know I've already banged on about this, but I do think then being able to enable decision makers and policy makers to hear the stories of people, current stories of people who are living challenging times. And I think one of the things is a reason that we quite keep doing, we're going to be doing another diagnosis survey soon. We know that it'll come up with roughly the same information, but we need to be able to say to policymakers, we can't have that, they said, you did that survey 4 years ago, it's all better now. We need to say, no, it's not. Look, we did it last week. And I think that's why, as you said, although some of the stories might seem repetitive, we need to be saying it's not changing quick enough. Anyway, I'm not sure if that's quite answered your answer, but I think there's definitely something around being evidence-based, knowing how it impacts on people, and having those stories to hand. And I'm sorry if that feels like using people's experience, but actually that's what demonstrates what it's really like to live with endometriosis, offering solutions, and offering, trying to work with other people. So we work with the Royal Colleges, try and work with a whole bunch of people to say, hey, look, we can do this together, etc., and influence as well.
You mentioned evidence-based learnings and statistics and kind of putting more case studies forward, which I think is incredible. I work in insights and data, and I absolutely love a stat. I do know that not enough women take part in clinical trials for endometriosis, which is an issue in the sense of we don't have enough data as a whole to potentially move forward in for surgeries. Or I could be wrong here, but do you think that is, do you have enough data is kind of my question, or what I'm getting at?
Yeah, there isn't enough data. And it seems like we don't know what causes endometriosis. There's various theories. But until we do like a really big study starting from pre-puberty, following people through, which will cost millions of pounds, that won't happen. There's some great advances in genetics being done in Oxford and other places as well. So there isn't enough. But one of the issues is that historically there's not been enough research in women's health, let alone endometriosis. We are starting to see some more, but it's, if you like, we haven't made up for that historic time. I think in terms of clinical trials, I think what's really difficult at the moment in the UK, so there was a clinical trial that actually got cancelled over COVID. Just after COVID, because there weren't the numbers of recruitment. But the thing is, a lot of clinical trials, you say you agree that you will be randomised, so a computer will decide whether you go for one treatment or another. And if that is between having surgery and not, and you've just waited 3 years and you really want surgery, you're not going to say, oh no, I don't mind, just randomise me, are you? Because you're desperate. And I think it's really hard for the researchers when there's very long waiting lists like there have been over COVID. Not every RIDAD, some people are getting on top of the waiting list. It's very hard to then ask people to randomise. But there are trials out there. For example, I know the Regal trial, which is looking at if you've already had surgery, does repeat surgery, or having been put into medical menopause with GNHR analogues, and add back HRT, what's the impact of those? And that's nearly completed its recruitment. So there are people out there, but I think it's not for lack of people wanting to help. It's about access. So not everyone who wants to help can, because their hospital might not be doing it. And also, if you've waited a long time to have something that you want, you're not necessarily going to want to randomise that. So I think there's that. I think the other thing, though, that is interesting, and you can do with long waiting lists, is, of course, if researchers want to do things that then compare the impact after surgery, then that's potential. But there's some really exciting research coming through. We just need more of it funded. And excitingly, in Australia, an amazing family, the Ainsworth family, have just announced a $50 million Australian dollar research fund. So I'm expecting to see a lot more research coming out of Australia as well.
Amazing. Well done, Down Under. I want to ask how you stay grounded with such a kind of stigmatized topic, and working in, for a company where there might be a lot of no's and there must be a lot of frustration. And does it get overwhelming for you?
Well, hopefully not overwhelming. I think there's a few things in that. Firstly, is there are some, if we do our job right at Endometriosis UK, it does feel like we can help people, and people give us feedback, and they'll ring up and say, oh, I got advice on the helpline 6 months ago and it's great, I've really managed to move forward, etc. So I think it's making sure that we share the examples of where we're doing well, remembering we always need to do loads more on that one. I'm an eternal optimist, so I always think that we're going to achieve change as well. And I think the other thing is, for me, is we do a lot of work to try and make sure we do know what's happening, and we've got case studies and we know what's happening. And that's a real driver, because there's people out there who need help. And it's a real motivator. If we can do our job right, we can really help people. So some of it might seem quite long term when we're trying to get a 10-year policy being changed or whatever it might be, and some of it's more immediate if it's helping somebody get a second referral, a second opinion, or if it's getting policy which change, which might take a few years. So I think really it's being really focused on the endometriosis community, and trying to really focus on making sure we're helping everybody in the endometriosis community, which of course is really challenging because there's such a diverse community out there. But for me, knowing that there's a big job to do and there's something worth fighting for is really why we're here doing it.
Amazing, Emma. I share that with you. Let's make some changes. So I'd like to talk about how we build a better future now, and how we move forward.
Mm-hmm.
If you could redesign the system from the ground up, what would better care for people with endometriosis actually look like?
I think firstly, better education on menstrual health and endometriosis for all healthcare practitioners, doctors, nurses, etc. is important, and we're looking at how we influence that, as others are too. Excuse me. So I think educating our healthcare practitioners, so when people go and ask for help, they go, oh yes, that could be endometriosis, what we're going to look into. I think supporting young people through menstrual health education in schools to understand their menstrual cycle, and to know in a managed way if there might be something that's not normal, not accept that period pain that's interfering in everyday life is normal, so we can support them to seek help. And in a way that they know what the right terms are. One of the things that we hear off medics is quite often young people, and even sometimes in people in their 20s, don't really know how to talk about menstrual health, parts of their body, that side of thing. And so I think there's a bunch of stuff around there. And then I think in terms of the medical system, I think it's quite simple, really. And in fact, it's all out there. We have a nice guideline on endometriosis. I don't think it's a gold standard, but I think it sets a good baseline for care. And if that was implemented, it'd be good. So what I'd say is endometriosis is a long-term condition, so it needs to be treated as such. At the moment, it's treated like an episode and then another one, so you have to almost fight to get back in the system, don't you? So it's about making sure the clear pathways there are for diagnosis are done. I think there's definitely something around some potential around gynecological ultrasound, which is developing in leaps and bounds. But this is by people who are specifically trained in gynae ultrasound and have the right kit set up in the right way, could do that. But I think really, I think the system is there. I think the biggest thing that I would do though is I don't think, I'm 100% sure that there is not enough time allocated to endometriosis and gynae menstrual health conditions in the NHS operating theatres or on the appointments list. And I think semantics comes into this. So personal view here. The medical definition of endometriosis is those of reproductive age. Now, in medical terms, that means first period to last period, although, of course, there can be impact of endometriosis longer term. But if you say of reproductive age to somebody who's going to work statistics out, they're going to think, 16, 18 to early 40s? And so I think, people are not realising that what we mean is like 10 to 52, not 16 or 18 to 42. Oh, wow. And I think we need to, make sure that we're, as a society, doing that. Now, I've limited evidence of that, but what I do know is that there's long waiting lists. There's just not enough theatre time. My magic one would be to take a step back and say, plan for the care for the volume that is needed, not the volume you've planned for in the past. And I think with developments in ultrasound, developments around diagnosing or seeing on an ultrasound adenomyosis as well as deep endometriosis and endometriomas, I think, actually saying, look, okay, let's plan for what needs doing. Because those waiting times are growing because there's just not enough capacity in the system. Now, someone's going to say, wow, it's all very well and good, but everyone's busy. But I would argue that if we streamlined the process, we would take a lot of wastage out of the system, multiple GP appointments, visits to A&E, etc. And so I think there's something like that. A very immediate thing, so it's not your big picture. The other thing that's really frustrating is you've got so many people on waiting lists and they're just left not knowing what's happening. They might be on a waiting. Are they still on it? Have they dropped off? Can they ever book a holiday? What happens if they what can they plan for the next year or not, etc. And I think there could be some really simple ways that the NHS could just keep patients a bit more informed, even if it's a letter every 3 months going, you are on the list. The waiting list is expected to be about X many months. We can't guarantee, because I know people who've not been booking holidays or not even done anything for a couple of years because they don't know when they're going to get their surgery.
I couldn't agree with that, anymore. For me, the waiting time was the thing which affected my mental health the most, and it's being in limbo. And being in limbo with your health is probably one of the worst things that you can actually deal with. So I thoroughly agree with that, and it's just that waiting time, because for the individual dealing with endometriosis, it's the centre of their life. But for a nurse that you're nagging, or a gynae that you're nagging, potentially, maybe let's not call it nagging, but chasing or calling, it's nothing, it's not top of their mind.
And also, it's not the gynae or the nurse who's allocating things. It's a manager somewhere else. It's an academic thing. So it's not those people. So they'll put some people on the list, but they aren't. The gynecologists I know like tearing their hair out over the list. They're like really upset about them. But I think it's around how do we support people when they are on a list in the immediate future. So, for example, there's a new section, updated section on NICE guideline on diagnosis, and it's really clear that whilst if a GP suspects endometriosis, they may need a referral to hospital, but they also will need pain management, excuse me, and they'll also need to go and have a scan because that's going to get done. And so what can we do to support people on the waiting list, not just leave them there for however long it might be?
Thank you, Emma, so much for all your insight throughout this podcast. Where can listeners go to support Endometriosis UK and get help themselves?
Well, the first place I'd suggest is our website, endometriosis-uk.org, or just Google Endometriosis UK. And we have a whole host of information on there and resources, webinars on all sorts of topics that you can rewatch. We also have links to our support services. So if you want to go and meet other people with endometriosis or talk to other people or to call our nurse-led helpline, you can find that there as well. And also, we also put on there all our campaigns. So we quite often have letter writing campaigns for MPs, so you can take part, etc. So do check out the website on that one.
Thank you. And finally, with the name of the podcast in mind, how do you think women, especially those navigating a chronic illness, can take up more space or own their space more fully, whether it be in healthcare, work, or daily life?
So I think owning space is a really interesting one, because I think that one of the challenges we see around endometriosis is that you're not allowed to own it. No, it's not that painful. Oh, I don't see why you can't do that, etc. And I think really one of the challenges that we have as a charity is trying to say to people, we believe you, and we're going to try and get others to believe you too. So I think I would say, your body, and it must be so hard, but if someone is saying, oh, I'm not sure, find someone else to speak to. Look for allies. There will be people out there to help, and stick with it. And I think it is really challenging. There's some amazing people out there trying to continue with an awful lot of adversity, and doing a brilliant job. But I would say, own your space. We believe in you. We know that you're not making this up, and let's find someone that also knows you're not making it up, and help them help you as well.
If any businesses or workplaces are listening and they want to become an endometriosis friendly workplace, how you mentioned the information on your website on Endometriosis UK's website, how can they become endometriosis friendly? I'm saying endometriosis so much now that I can barely say it. So how do they go about getting that certification?
So it's really simple. What we have decided to go for is asking people to give a commitment. So it's not it's not a big accreditation scheme or anything like that. So what a company needs to do, and please do this if you're listening, is check out our website. You sign up to making a commitment to improving things for your employers with endometriosis. You have a year, and then after a year, we ask you to send us in a report outlining in 3 areas like leadership, culture, and information what you've done to support your employers, and we take a look at that. And then we ask you to refresh that every 2 years. And so really, if you're a big company, you've got an HR team, they'll be great. All they'll need to be doing is looking if you've got good policies, making sure they apply for endometriosis, fluctuating conditions, making sure there's something on your intranet so that people know the word endometriosis, etc. And what we find is that endometriosis-friendly employers help all those with menstrual health conditions because they raise it. If you're a small organisation, you can still be an endometriosis-friendly employer, but if you're feeling that's a bit much, we also have a load of resources on menstrual health at work, so that you can find out about all menstrual health conditions like endometriosis, adenomyosis, diagnosis, etc. And then you can help your employees. So I think really is doing something. Don't be overwhelmed by the thought of there's a lot to do. Like, there's definitely things you can do and steps to go in the right direction, and we can help you with that.
Thank you so much, Emma, for coming on my podcast, being the first guest. I'm truly, truly honoured. And, you know, as endometriosis is so close to my heart, thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.